So I'm hoping that this conversation today helps you to fall in love with the rhythms of nature and to discover how those rhythms of nature are within you and that how you fit into nature herself. So all things cycle. And the blessing of being a student of the Chinese five-element theory is recognizing that everything under the sun has a cycle. There's a gestation period, a birth period, a period of fruition, a period of decline. So everything has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Some cycles last the length of a heartbeat. Some cycles last the length of a day. Other cycles last the length of a year, and still others last the length of a lifetime. Sometimes we'll witness a cycle from beginning to its end, a project, a course of study, the turning of the year from winter to fall, or even a relationship. Sometimes it's an idea that we have that we watch cycle from the idea, from its conception into its manifestation, into moving out into the world and being recognized and utilized by other people. And inevitably, that idea will come to its completion, making room for a new idea to arise. Other times, a cycle is longer than a lifetime, and we find ourselves somewhere in the middle of it thinking, this is how it's always been, this is how it will always be. It will never change, it'll just be like this. Think of the Roman Empire, the 1,000-year cycle. When you're in it, in the middle of it, you don't know if you're in the beginning of it, in the middle of it, or in the end of it, but everything ends. Everything comes to its completion, it crumbles, it becomes compost, and then something else will arise after that. Entropy is inevitable. So all lifetime cycle, all relationship cycle, all physical manifestations cycle. Buddha said that it is our attachment to things that create suffering. So when we are attached to something being the way that it's always been or the way that we always want it to be, and it comes to the completion of its cycle, that's where we create our own suffering by being attached to something staying the same the way it always has been. I first became familiar with the Chinese five elements as a massage student at the Boulder College of Massage Therapy, studying shiatsu. And at the time, I just didn't relate. I didn't make a connection. It seemed so foreign to me. It was this, literally Chinese. It was a whole other culture, and I couldn't really find myself in it. What did it have to do with my hippie girl life in the Colorado Rockies? I learned about it in general, but I dropped the thread really for many, many years until I started studying with Donna Eden. And when we were studying the Chinese five-element theory again, I started bit by bit to relate it to my own life. And when I look at nature and I look at how I can see the cycles cycling through nature, I started being able to see how they were cycling through my life as well. And there are so many complexities to it. But with this understanding, I find that I can navigate life with much more ease and grace because I understand everything has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So the Chinese call them the five elements. Donna Eden calls them the five rhythms. And I really like that term because this is a rhythm. There's a real rhythm to these cycles. And there is a vibrational signature to each one of the elements. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail shortly. Sometimes they're called the five phases. That works too. Sometimes they're called the five vibrations. So we'll talk about the five vibrations a little bit more when we start talking about how they influence our personality and our psyche. So let's take a look at these elements of nature, and we'll see how their energies influence life in general and our own lives in particular, and how we can work with them to help stabilize our lives so that we can enjoy a life of better balance and better flow. So here we have the image of the cosmos. Everything, well, this is the big picture image. I like to start from out there and bring it down into a little bit more immediate and tangible information. So the 5 elements that we're talking about in nature are water, wood, fire, earth, and metal. We see each of these elements in nature. We all experience, we need water. We know water is life, right? Water is so crucial. We see wood represents not just trees, but plants, all of the growing things on the planet. Fire from the sun, also fire in our hearth, keeps us warm, transforms our food. Earth, we all live on the earth. Such a crucial, just, you can't even imagine life without being on the earth. And the metal is, I always think of the metal as the minerals, mountains, stones, rocks, but minerals that also are in our blood. Those are those basic 5 elements. Each one of these elements also shows up as a season. The vibration of that element also is the same vibration of a season. So our water element is the same vibration of winter season. It's a lower, slower vibration. Things kind of get a little bit quiet and a little bit still. Winter is a time where we can gestate ideas, where we dream, where we make soup and sit around the fire, and things are kind of close to the hearth because the planet is still, it's quiet, it's not in the process of creating, it's gestating. Spring is the season of wood, and that's when things start to move. The seeds start to unfold, they start to break through their husks and move upward and outward toward the surface of the planet. Summer is where things are in full-blown fruition, where the fruits are growing on the trees, where the berries are being picked, the tomatoes are getting nice and red and ripe. It's the season of fruition. The earth element is the element of the equinoxes and the solstices. So earth element doesn't have a specific season so much as it shows up between the transitions of each of those seasons. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a second. And then we have autumn, which is the season of metal. And this is when those plants or the fruits start falling off the vine. The tomatoes are ripe and ready to pick. Plants that have been through their cycle are ready to be composted, to be pulled. So this is the decline. This is the ending of the process of the whole cycle. It's the ending of the year with the season of fall. And with the completion of fall, we move once again into that gestating period of winter, where things are still and quiet and gathering energy in preparation for the new cycle. Now, I want to talk a little bit about an alternative model that I really love to look at. The model that we're mostly looking at today is of the Chinese 5 elements, where each of them are in a relationship like a star pattern. But there's also an even older model of the 5 elements that puts the earth in the middle. That solstice equinox time sits there in the middle. And in this instance, it holds the balance. I often like to think of it as like the fulcrum of a scale. It holds the steady center while everything else moves around it. So it holds the balance between the heat and the wild fruition of summer and that deep inner quiet stillness of the winter. So there's the summer solstice is the peak of the year and the winter solstice is the bottom of the year. Earth holds the balance between those two. Also, between spring and fall. So Earth holds the balance between spring and fall. It's the center, it's the fulcrum. And each time that we move from one season into the next, that grounding force, that grounding stability of Earth element shows up to help manage the transition between the seasons. So I talk about that a lot in other classes that I teach. But right now, we're going to return to the star model of the 5 elements that is more familiar to most people. When I talk about Earth in the middle, though, that's where I kind of see the Celtic calendar. And this is where the Celtic spirituality really emerges for me. This symbol of the Celtic cross illustrates in my mind how Earth is the center, Earth is the circle that holds the dynamic tension, the balance between each of the other seasons, each of the other rhythms or elements. And I love the overlay of the Celtic spirituality with the Chinese 5 elements. That's where I really find the most meaning and the most connection with these elements and with my life. Back to looking at the model of the star relationship. We can see these 5 phases happening in plant life. I've kind of mentioned this. With that water element, that's our gestation time. That's when the seeds are deep in the ground. They are starting to imagine themselves breaking forth and becoming the plant that they are destined to be. There's the springtime. This is the birth time. This is the element of wood, where things do burst forth, where that seed breaks up through the ground and starts to become a plant. Then it comes into fruition. I mentioned tomatoes earlier. This is where the tomatoes are ripening. They're red on the vine. They're ready to be picked. They're ready to be utilized. Then we get to the harvest time. This is where it's really time to gather all of the fruits off of the vine that have been growing through the season. And then, of course, we end up in the metal season, the end of this plant's life cycle, where the plant is ready to be pulled from the ground, it's put into the compost, it breaks down into complete and total decline, and then its nutrients feed the soil, which feeds the seed, which begins the next cycle. So that's how we see the phases in the cycle of plant life. We also can see these same 5 phases in the cycle of a human life. There's the gestation period. And in fact, we even gestate in water. It's also like a dreaming period. It's where we are dreaming ourselves into being. Then there is the birth period, the period of wood, where the baby comes out, the baby starts feeling and experiencing their whole environment, and they are excited and looking forward to what's next, what else can I experience, how do I do this body thing? And they start standing up and they start moving forward. Then in the phase of a human life, we have adulthood. This is the season of fire in a human lifetime. This is when we have, for the most part, hopefully people have found their purpose. This is what they're going to do. This is what they're going to create and contribute to society and to their culture. Whatever it is, this is when we are in our full bloom, if you will. And then the human life cycles into maturity, where we're not quite so driven, we're not quite so out there. We're starting to really savor what we have done in our life, savor the fruits of what we have done and all the work that we have put out, all the things that we have contributed. And then we move into old age, death, and eventually, or decline and eventually death. So as I said before, entropy is inevitable, and that means in the human life as well. And we need to recognize that every life is going to cycle and come into completion. And then there is that key moment between the end and the beginning of the new cycle. So that's how it all shows up in a human life. coming down into a little bit more microcosm in the course of a day. We will see these 5 phases showing up. At night, the water element, this is where we dream. This is where we gather our energy. We replenish ourselves. But we're in that dreaming phase. It's a little bit nebulous. It's a little otherworldly. Then comes the vibration of wood element. This is where we burst forth. We wake up. We're ready to start our day. We get moving forward. At the peak of the day, somewhere around noon, we're fully active. We're out in the world. We're doing our thing. We're contributing how we contribute. We're getting stuff done. And then as the day moves on, we get into the later afternoon. It's time to start winding down. This is maybe where we socialize, where we have a meal, where we play a little bit before the end of the day. And then, of course, the day comes to completion and we get to the evening. We start preparing ourselves for that deep rest period. Things tend to get quieter and more still, and we let go of what we've been doing for the day and we prepare for the next cycle. So the key to balance in a life is the relationship between the elements. So let's look at how each of the elements relate to each other. There needs to be a dynamic tension, a relationship between each of these elements. In the Chinese 5-element theory, there are 2 different cycles that we talk about. First of all, there's the flow cycle. And the flow cycle is also sometimes called the feeding cycle or the generating cycle. And each element feeds or generates, it supports the element behind it. One rhythm feeds into the next rhythm. So water, for instance, nourishes all of the sprouts that grow into wood. We know that water is life. Without water, none of this can happen. It all emerges from water's ability to nourish life. And water nourishes all of the things that grow up out of the earth. Wood element gives fuel for fire to burn. This is how wood nourishes fire. Fire element creates ash and provides the ash which helps to build the earth. It also affects the balance of pH in the soil of the earth. Earth provides the storage, the support. It contains the metals, which are also very crucial for life functioning. And metal feeds crucial life-sustaining minerals into the water. It also provides the bottom of our creeks and our stream beds. So this is the flow cycle, one feeding into the next. We also then have the control cycle. The control cycle is also called the destructing cycle or the interrestraining cycle. And these elements all have symbiotic relationships. One rhythm keeps another one in check, to keeps it from getting out of control. But there's also a reverse relationship. We'll look at that here in just a second. So for instance, water element controls fire element. This is pretty self-explanatory. You pour water on a fire when the fire is getting out of control. But at the same time, fire transforms water into steam. Looking between fire and metal, fire transforms metal by melting it, and it becomes usable for some other. We can manipulate it and turn it into something other than a chunk of metal. So fire transforms metal, where at the same time, metal can provide a container for fire. So when you think about a fire ring or you think about a wood stove, metal itself creates a container so that fire can do its work without going out of control. So there's this incredible symbiotic relationship between those 2 elements. Between metal element and wood element, Metal transforms wood by cutting it or drilling it, but also by connecting it. So if you think of nails or screws, or as in the picture, a chisel that will control and change the wood, metal controls wood in this way. At the same time, wood transforms metal into something more usable. If you think about the handle of a tool that's wood, that creates so that you can use that chisel by holding the metal or the wooden handle on the metal tool. Wood helps metal to be even more effective and more impactful in its way of in its contribution. And then we have the relationship between wood and earth. This is one of my favorites because I'm very wood element. I'm also very earth element. Wood helps to maintain Earth's integrity with the roots that it sends down into the earth. Without those roots, without all the roots, not just of the trees, but of all of the plants, the earth would just wash away. The water would wash it away. The wind would wash it away. It wouldn't have the integrity that it does by virtue of the roots that are reaching down and holding the earth together. Those trees and those plants couldn't do anything without earth to sustain them, to support them. So there's an incredible symbiotic relationship there between wood and earth. And then there's the relationship between earth and water. Earth controls water by containing it. It creates channels for rivers and streams to run through, and it creates the banks and shores that contain ponds, lakes, and oceans. At the same time, water nourishes life through the sponge of the earth. Earth absorbs the water and then distributes it to all living things in its care. So this is a crucial relationship between earth and water. So I'm hoping that you can see in this particular discussion about the dynamic tension that's really important between each of these elements. Without water element to help to control the fire element, it could just burn out of control. Without the fire element that helps to transform the metal, we wouldn't have access to or use of all of the incredibly valuable functions that metal can provide us. Without that relationship between metal and wood, we wouldn't, as human culture, wouldn't be building things and being able to create things and utilize that metal to the ability that we can. That relationship between wood and earth. The earth would just dry up and blow away without the wood holding its integrity together. And without that relationship between earth and water, earth would not be able to help to distribute the absolutely crucial life-giving properties of water to the rest of life. It's the dynamic tension between each of them is really, really important. So now let's look at the influence of each of these elements on the psyche and the personality. How does this affect me personally? How do I behave when I am influenced by these elements or these rhythms? We all process information differently. And each of us is influenced primarily by one element that informs our personality and our way of interacting and responding to the world. And these inherent qualities are both our greatest assets and our greatest challenges. When we're not under stress, we have access to all of the elements. But when we are under stress, it gets narrowed down to only having access to one element. And that's where our behavior starts getting a little bit wonky, a little out of control. All of us are made up of all of these rhythms. I really want to be clear about that. People get very interested in what element they are, like what sign am I? But all of us have all of these rhythms running through us. We have one that is our primary element, and that shows up the most when we're stressed out. When we're not stressed out, it might be difficult to tell what rhythm a person is because they have access to each of those rhythms. So when you understand that you or somebody that you are interacting with, when you understand that you've gone out of balance and you've defaulted to your primary rhythm, I find that having this understanding helps me become so much more compassionate, and I can be more present with people because I can recognize that it's stress that has taken them into their default rhythm, and that is why they are behaving the way that they are. It's a real relief to me to not end up thinking, God, what an asshole. No, it's just because they're stressed out and their primary rhythm is wood, and they've defaulted to being angry and judgmental. So right now, I want to talk about the 5 elements more like the 5 vibrations, because each one of the phases in each cycle of nature has a particular vibrational signature, which influences the body, the personality, the psyche, and the emotions. So at different moments in our lives, we may be subject to the influence of one of these elements in particular. We might actually be exhibiting one of those vibrations really strongly. We may tend to be quiet and introspective, or we may be in a warm, gregarious, outgoing energy vibration. So this can speak to the phase that we are in, the cycle, the phase of the cycle that we are in. Everybody has one vibrational tendency that is their default system. When we're in balance, we have a strong dynamic relationship going between each of those elements, and we have access to all of the vibrations. But when we're under duress, we fall out of balance, and we have to lean into, or where we are subject to just the one element that is our strong suit. So this is, and it can start running the show, and our behavior will reflect that. There's also a whole other piece of how these vibrations run through our system, through our meridian system, and affect our physiology. But right now, we're just going to talk about the psycho-emotional aspects of the rhythms and how they influence us. So let's look at it first in nature, and then we'll correlate it back to how we notice it in our bodies. So in nature, when water is in balance, it's flowing, it moves around obstacles, it finds its way, and it's persistent. Wood, when it's in balance, is flexible and responsive. If you think of classically, the Chinese use the image of bamboo to represent wood. When the wind blows, it bends, it's flexible, it can move with whatever nature is bringing to it. In nature, in balance, fire is very dynamic. It's very transformative. It's warming. The sun, of course, is the primary representative of fire, but also the fire that we have in our hearth, the fire that keeps us warm, the fire that cooks our food. That fire is it's dynamic and it's transformative. It's a real servant to life. Earth element is stable, it's supportive. The earth supports everything. It supports all of life as it unfolds. So earth element, or just the earth itself, is stable and supportive. Metal, I think of as being grace under pressure. So there is pressure because metals are inside, underneath the earth. And those metals can become just incredibly beautiful things like gold, like silver. And also I would include crystals in the metal element. You can, when there's that pressure, the crystal develops and it just becomes incredibly beautiful. So let's look at how these correlate with our personalities. Water element people tend to be imaginative, courageous, contemplative, and reflective. They can be real quiet and inward thinking, and philosophers often is the archetype that's associated with water element. Wood element kind, inclusive, generous, visionary, willing to lead, willing to get things done. When you think about that wood energy, as we've been talking about it, it's moving forward, it's moving upward, it's moving outward. I often will think of the personality of wood element as the top of the canopy of the tree, where there's perspective and you can see everything that is surrounding. You can see where we want to go and what needs to be done. Fire element tends to be very joyous, very magnetic, also can be very discerning. Fire element is very charismatic and fun and the life of the party, and people are really drawn to fire element. They're very inspiring. It's an inspiring type of personality. And again, I just want to reiterate, we have all of these possibilities in our personality. Some of us just tend to lean into one vibration a little bit more than another. Earth element, like the earth herself, tends to be very nurturing, compassionate, balanced, a peacemaker. Remember, I talked about earth being like that fulcrum of the scale, centered, grounded, a diplomat, there to help and to support everybody else and all of the other elements, to make sure everybody has what they need and that the transitions are smooth. Metal element personalities tend to be allowing, distilling, forgiving. They are clear and concise, organized. They like to distill the extraneous chaff down into the nugget of what is ultimately important. So if we are primarily influenced by the vibration of water element, our personality may be contemplative and courageous. If we are primarily influenced by wood, our personality may be direct, generous, and willing to take responsibility. If we are primarily influenced by fire, our personality may be very warm, joyful, and magnetic. If we're primarily influenced by earth, our personality may be more diplomatic, compassionate, and nurturing. And if we're primarily influenced by the vibration of metal, we might be more forgiving, allowing, discerning, and there's another word that I want. Well, spiritual. Metal element people tend to really look at things from a spiritual perspective. All right, so let's look at now what happens when the elements fall out of balance. And we'll turn again to nature. Let's look in nature what happens when each of these elements gets out of balance. So water element in nature, when it's out of balance, it can flood. It can also stagnate, or it can get stuck in a swirl and not be able to move forward. Wood element, when it gets out of balance, it can become inflexible and rigid. So then when the wind blows, instead of being able to go with the wind, it might snap and break. Fire element, when it gets out of control, unfortunately with climate change, we're seeing this all too frequently, it will just burn unchecked. Very, very destructive. Earth element, when it gets out of balance, it will buckle. It will fall apart. If you think about earthquakes and what happens to the earth when a big earthquake happens, that's how the earth responds to stress. And then with metal element, the metals, I think of them as clinging and not wanting to let go. They're very hard to extract from the earth when metal element is out of balance. Let's look at how this now correlates with a personality, with a person's psyche or emotional balance. When these elements are out of balance, our water element tends to default towards fear. Fear, blame, defensiveness, hopelessness. They might just collapse inside, and they might become kind of infantile. They might revert to a more infantile state. Wood element tends to become angry, judgmental, inflexible, and controlling. They can get really rigid, also explosive, blunt, very direct. They lose their grace. They lose their diplomatic abilities. Fire element. When fire element in a personality is out of control, they can become very panicked, very frenzied, overcommitted. Fire element likes to say, yes, 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 everything sounds fun, let's do all of that. And then it comes to the point where they go, I can't do all of those things, and end up having to back off and say no, or not show up and disappoint people. Earth element. Earth element tends to worry, to be a busybody or an enabler, to also to become overwhelmed, because earth element becomes so concerned with everybody else and everything else, and everyone else's needs met, that their own needs are not met, and they can no longer hold that stable, steady core and be the supportive personality that they want to be for other people. Metal element tends towards grief and being perfectionists and the inability to let go. So when they are in balance, they can surrender and they can allow and they can move on to the next phase. When they're out of balance, they just hold on and they cling to what was. And they forget that there's going to be a new cycle that's going to arise. They forget that everything passes, everything goes through an end and into a new beginning. So they cling. They can also become very single-minded in their focus, and they can become overly serious and exclusionary. So if a person is primarily influenced by the vibration of water, they may default to fear and defensiveness when they reach a certain stress level. If a person is primarily influenced by the wood element, they get stressed out. They're going to become angry, bossy, judgmental. If a person is primarily influenced by the fire element and they get stressed out, they may default to panic or hysteria. A person primarily influenced by the earth element, when they get stressed out, they might default to worrying or feeling overwhelmed. And a person who is a more metal element, when they get stressed out, they may default to perfectionism, to clinging, to being overly serious, or to being mired in grief and not being able to move forward from that. So now let's talk about how we can engage with our own energies in order to balance the 5 elements within us. And I'm really here talking mostly just about psycho-emotional interaction, psycho-emotional influence of the elements. Physiologically, we're talking about the meridian system, and that's another huge subject. But just now, I want to give you some tools that you can use to help balance, especially if you're feeling off-kilter emotionally. This is a way that you can help to balance your own elements and also to bring them into better relationship with each other to create that dynamic tension. So we're going to work with neurovascular reflex points, and these help to bring the rhythms back into balance. So neurovascular reflex points, and I like to emphasize the word reflex because these points trigger a reflex in the vascular system. And we're going to find all of these points on the head. These points help to increase circulation in the brain. They also help to balance the energy in the brain. The main neurovasculars that you're going to find here on the front of the forehead, these bring blood and energy into the forebrain, where new options and ideas are processed. This is where we have our language. This is where we can recognize patterns. This is where we can think more clearly. It increases our ability to choose rather than to react. Neurovascular reflex points have a real calming effect. It's really helpful to use these points often and early If you get into a reactive state and you're really upset, you can certainly use them then. But this is a really nice tonifying process where you can just help to build the energy and the responsiveness of your energy in these points, so that when you do come to a point where you're stressed out, where some kind of duress occurs, you'll be better prepared to be able to navigate that, because your energy is going to be flowing in your brain better. So using the neurovascular reflex points, it doesn't necessarily change the memory of the trauma or stress, but it does change the reaction to the memory of the trauma or the stress. It gives a more clear or measured perception or recollection of the events, and it increases the capacity to respond. I want to show you each one of the points. So we have the main points. We have the water points at the back of the occiput, and this is just right at the curve of the occiput, very low there. We have the wood element points, which are just on the outside of the eye. We have the fire element points, which are about straight back from the eyes, just above those water points. We have the earth element points. These are just below the eyes on the bone there underneath the eye. And we have the metal element points, which is just at the very top of the head, or what you might think of as the baby soft spot. So let's hold each individual point. We can help to balance the individual elements by holding these points. So let's rub our hands together, shake them off, have a breath. I'd like you to actually take a breath and feel your feet on the ground, feel your butt in your seat, feel yourself present in this moment. And we're going to use the breath as well. We really want full breath in, full breath out, and we're going to do that in and out through the nose. So let's start with a palm on the main neurovasculars, and we're going to keep that palm there throughout this whole process. Then the other hand is going to come to the back, right to the curve of the occiput. This is where your water element points are. So we're going to hold those points and take a nice full breath in through the nose and full breath out through the nose. And you can close your eyes. Your hands are very soft. You don't want your hands to be pressing or feeling stress or tension. You just want your hands to be soft, lightly touching these points, creating a little electrical connection between the palms of your hands and the points. As you're holding these water points, you might wonder to yourself, what am I afraid to begin or to reveal? You might also consider, how easily do I put my dreams in motion? Let's take a full breath in through the nose and exhale through the nose. And now we're going to move that back hand to the wood points. The wood points, you can use your thumb and your middle finger to touch on either side of your eyes. If you'd like to maintain that connection to the main points, you can do that as well. And again, with the breath full, let your eyes be soft and closed, gentle hands, just resting gently on these points. And as you hold these wood points, you might wonder, thinking to yourself, how might I be taking over? How often do I feel impatient? Am I disdainful? Do I tend to push upstream? Gently holding these points will help to balance the energies that could potentially lead you to that kind of behavior. And now let's move that hand to the fire point. Fire point, it's behind the eyes. And you'll hold these points again gently. And if your arms get tired, you can lean back somewhere. If you have pillows, you can lean back and support your arms. Or you could even lean forward and rest your elbows on the table in front of you if you'd like. You could also switch hands if you need to, if your arms are getting tired. So breathing in and out through the nose, letting your shoulders relax as best they can while you're holding these fire points. You might think to yourself, have I lost my ability to discern? Am I overextending myself? Do I say yes too often? And now let's bring that back hand around to the face, thumb and middle finger, holding these earth element points on the bone just below the eyes, straight down from your pupils. Inhaling and exhaling through the nose. Eyes are soft. And as you hold these earth element points, you might consider, have I lost my center, my sense of self? Have I put others ahead of myself for too long? How am I enabling others' dysfunctions or contributing to codependency? Let your fingertips just gently rest against your skin. And now let's move that hand to the very top of the head, using the center of your palm to connect with the center of the head. These are our metal element points. Hands are soft, breath is full. And with these metal element points, you might ask yourself, what can I not let go of? What am I clinging to? How am I letting my grief or disappointment keep me from moving forward? Another full breath. Exhaling through the nose. And you can gently release your hands and bring your arms down. You can hold one point for as long as you'd like. If you know that you are particularly out of balance, or you recognize that you're particularly out of balance with one element or another, you can hold one point for however long you feel. If you can do that comfortably, you could hold it for 20 minutes if that's what you need. Or you can do like we just did, holding one after the other after the other. That helps to balance each individual point. Now I want to look at balancing that dynamic tension between each of the elements. So what we're going to do is we're going to use that same star-like pattern that showed us that dynamic relationship between the elements. We're going to start by holding the points around the flow cycle. Then we will shift to holding the points in the control cycle. So in the flow cycle, we'll hold water and wood, the points on the either side of the eye. And we'll hold those for a breath or so. Then we're going to keep a hold of the wood points at the side of the eye and bring the back hand up to fire. So now we're letting the wood element feed the fire element. Maintaining the hand at the fire element, we're going to bring these fingers to the earth element. So now we're connecting earth with the fire, letting the fire feed the earth. And then moving on with the hand from the back of the head goes to the top of the head, to the metal element. Allowing the earth element to feed the metal element. And now releasing the earth element and bringing it back to the water element we'll connect metal and water. And now gently release your hands and bring your arms down. Let your arms and shoulders relax. And last but not least, we're going to connect through the control cycle. And you can take a lot more time doing this on your own than I'm taking with you right now. So let's on the control cycle. Again, we're going to start with water. It all emerges from water. So one hand at the water element points, the other hand at the fire point. So that just the two hands are one right above the other on the back of the skull. You'll hold those for a few breaths, and then you're going to keep the hand at the fire element points that are behind your eyes, and move the other hand to the metal element points. There's that dynamic relationship between fire and metal. And now we're going to connect metal and wood. So the hand that's at the back of your head is going to come around to the outside edge of your eyes, holding them while you breathe. And then we're going to connect the wood and the earth by bringing the top hand down and underneath your eyes. Better to do without the glasses. Holding these 2 points for a couple of full breaths. Now we're going to connect earth and water, so keep the points on below the eyes and hold just above that occiput. And that completes the control cycle. And if you become aware that you have a particular imbalance between any of these elements, if you feel like your fire element is out of control and you are defaulting into panic or hysteria, you might want to connect your water element and your fire element points together, because that's going to help to bring balance between those two elements. Or if you find that your earth element is just so overblown, you're really overwhelmed, you're thinking only about everybody else's everything, and you've lost your own center, you might want to hold the wood and the earth points together to help stabilize the earth with that stabilizing energy of the wood element. So to wrap this whole process up, I just want to say that since I made this connection for myself between the elements of nature and their cycles, their rhythms, their expressions, and my own body, my own psyche, my own emotional rhythms, and my spirit, the Chinese theory of the 5 elements has become so much more personal to me, so much more practical and applicable to my life and my experience. And I have fallen in love with this way of perceiving the world, of perceiving life, of perceiving and seeing nature in myself, finding myself in nature, and finding that belonging and that connection with all that is, and notice how it's running through myself and it's running through my life. This has made me become a much more compassionate person, a more patient person, a more understanding and confident person, and it's really helped to build my trust in the life force impulse when I can recognize how everything cycles through countless beginnings and endings. And when I can move with the flow, when I can allow that, not just that, but when I can embrace it and love it and recognize it, my life becomes so much more fluid, so much more confident, so much more meaningful. And I really hope that you find this as well when you start to recognize nature in yourself and yourself in nature. And when you recognize that you can begin to help address that, the balances and the imbalances in your own psyche and personality, I think you'll find yourself in a whole new place, in a whole new relationship with life. Blessed be.